Hi everybody and welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Greta and I'm the dietitian at John Stoddard Cancer Center. So I have another great brand new recipe for you that I wrote this winter, and it is a no beef stew, but it's so rich and so delicious you won't miss the meat, I promise. So we're gonna get started chopping all of our veggies for this. Lots of good meaty veggies, making this really hearty. So I have some carrots here. It calls for about 3 carrots, but mine were just kind of tiny. So I'm gonna do a few little ones too. Because this is a stew, we can leave things a little bit bigger. We don't have to cut things quite as small. Because you know how in a stew, it's hearty. You want nice big hearty bites. So we're just gonna chopping my carrots up into like 3/4 inch size-ish pieces. These were really skinny, tiny carrots. I'm gonna half that one. I did peel my carrots before I started chopping them. When I was trying to name this recipe, we all kind of giggled in my house because I thought of that Wendy's commercial back in the 80s, "Where's the beef?" But this is one time you're not going to say, "I miss the beef." You're going to be pleasantly surprised. Alright, and we're going to use a lot of the basic ingredients that are in even a beef stew: carrots, onion, some celery, some potatoes. But we're going to add lots of great herbs, tons of garlic. So it's really going to make this a really rich stew. Alright. Now the carrots and onion or celery are going to all cook together. So I'm chopping them all together. And you know me, I like to have everything chopped and ready to go. Then it's just sort of a dump it in the pot. This is also a pretty easy, fast recipe because we don't have to cook any meat. It's a nice weeknight one. It's also one that you can make on the weekends. It reheats really well. It freezes really well. So it's a really versatile one. Alright, so I'm just going to chop up my onion. My skin of my onion just doesn't want to come off. There he goes. You could use white onion or yellow onion, it doesn't matter. Alright. And again, I am not going to chop my onion too small. I kind of want my pieces of everything to be a little bit bigger in this. It's not like not a soup, it's a stew, so which is kind of nice. It's less chopping. So I'm leaving my onion in kind of bigger 3/4 inch chunks. Just like that. I kind of like stews. It's less fussy in a way than a soup, just because you can leave everything a bit hunkier. Except the garlic, of course. I'm not going to get out of chopping garlic. So we're going to use a combination of fresh and dry herbs, again, to really increase the depth of the flavor in this. Alright, and of course our favorite veggie stock is going to reappear. Alright, some celery. Again, my celery stalks were kind of small, so I'm doing 4 small ones. You use your best judgment when you're choosing and chopping your veggies. Alright, so they're just trimmed off. Again, I'm going to chop these into bigger size chunks. Stews, I like to use my nice big spoons when you're eating a stew. You want nice big hearty bites, right? And I leave the green parts in there. Alright, celery. Alright, the really meaty part of this, remember my theme for this time. mushrooms. So we're doing about 8 ounces of mushrooms. And I'm going to remove the stems. You know, if you do make your own veggie stock, save your mushroom stems because you can stick them in the freezer, and then when you go to make stock, you can use the stems for your stock. They're a little bit tough with, you know, as far as cooking them, but they're perfect to save for stock, and then you don't feel like that you've wasted them. You know, a lot of people don't like to make stock because they feel like it's wasteful, but if you're using your trimmings, then you haven't wasted anything. So again, mushrooms too, nice big meaty chunks. Kind of cutting them into like quarters or putting shape cuts in them like that. Nice big 3/4 size inch pieces. That one's a little bigger than I like. All right. Couple more. All right, and that's our mushrooms. Okay. Then, of course, our traditional ingredient in a stew. I'm going to do our garlic in just a little bit. It's going to be potatoes. So I picked red potato. And the skin on the red potato is really kind of thin and delicate. So I'm not going to peel my potatoes. If you're doing a bigger, like, russet potato, you might want to peel them. Because it's just a kind of a tougher skin. It depends on what texture you want your stew to be. If you don't mind them, you can just leave them on. So I'm cutting my potatoes also into nice sort of 3/4 inch size pieces. My potatoes are all completely rinsed. So what I do is I cut them in half. And then if you want them to lay flat, cut them in half again. And then 1, 2, 3, and that makes perfect kind of 3/4 inch size bites. Sometimes I cheat and I just roll it over and just hold the whole thing together and do it like that. But if you're concerned about your fingers, then get it on its flat surface so it doesn't roll around. All right. These are some beautiful potatoes. I think the first time I made this, I had a combination of a couple different kinds of potatoes on my counter. So I think I used some blue potatoes too, so it was really pretty. You could even cut up a couple pounds of, you know, if you have fingerling potatoes on hand to use up. Again, they have some nice delicate skin on them, so you don't have to peel them. You can use a Yukon Gold potato in this too. Really whatever your preference is and whatever you have. It's a nice thing about soups and stews. You can really adjust them to whatever your taste is. You know, I get a lot of comments from people sometimes when they read some of my recipes and say, well, I didn't like that ingredient. Don't let that stop you from making a recipe, because you can substitute it with something else that you do like. And I do that all the time. I'm constantly substituting ingredients for either things that I like or things that I have on hand. I'm going to use what I have. And that's how you adjust recipes for seasons too. Adjust it to what is available. Then you can get more use out of your recipe. Never be afraid to use a recipe because maybe it has something that you aren't partial to. We can always find a substitution. A little spot on. I'm going to cut that off. All right. Just a couple more. Except for garlic, I always like the chopping part. I find it a very calming activity. It's also very good for your dexterity. It's good to get your fingers doing and strengthening. Never thought of cooking as being an exercise, but it really is. For your mind and for your hands. All right. These guys had a couple spots on them that I don't like. A couple more. These potatoes are really nice, creamy potatoes. So they are going to be perfect. And again, the potatoes and the mushrooms, it's what makes this really hearty dish that you're not like, this should have meat in it. All right, potatoes are done. Now, always my least favorite part. Oh, garlic. Oh, I loathe chopping you. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're gonna do 6 cloves of garlic. I know that sounds like a lot, but that's how we infuse lots of flavor without lots of fat and without lots of salt. Using herbs and using garlic, we really bump up the flavor. And this is a very low fat recipe. There's only 2 tablespoons of olive oil in the whole recipe, and that's it. That is all of your fat, which is incredible. I didn't necessarily do it on purpose this time, but I really found some great, very low fat recipes for you for this time. All right. I am going to keep working on this garlic because this is a long activity. And as soon as I am done chopping this garlic, I will come right back and we'll start putting this together. Okay, so I've got my garlic all chopped. I added it to my bowl with my mushrooms because they're going to go in together. I've got my fresh rosemary here. These pieces came out of my greenhouse and they're starting to dry out a little bit, so they're pretty easy to pull off. But again, if you just hold your rosemary at the top and pull, you should be able to get all of the leaves off really easy, and then you're stuck with the stem and we can discard that. I'm just going to chop this up a little bit. I have my pot over on the stove. It is heating right now at medium-high heat with 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. And we're going to start cooking up our veggies to get the stew put together. I was cooking yesterday and I was using, this is my usual cutting board, I was using a different one. And I noticed everything kept flying off my cutting board, and it just occurred to me this cutting board has a little well on it, so things tend to stay put better. I didn't even think about that. Perfect, looks good. If you don't have fresh rosemary, fresh thyme would be good in this too. All right, it's about 2 teaspoons. All right, perfect. The other thing I want to get ready is my tomato paste. So we're going to use a whole can, or about 1/3 of a cup of tomato paste. I want to show you a little trick. I used to hate when these little cans are tiny, they're hard to get all the tomato paste out. So this is what I do. I open up one end, and then I flip it over and open the other end, just like that. So then what you can do, and I'm going to show you when we add the tomato paste, you can just push it through with the lid. It just makes it so much easier. All right, let's go check on our heat over here on our stove top. So I've got my oil heating up. I can smell it. Again, spoon test. Oh yeah, we got bubbles. So we're going to do our celery, our onion, and our carrots. Ooh, it snapped up at me. We're going to get them cooking and softened. I am going to go ahead and season this now, this layer. So I'm going to add some pepper. I like lots of pepper in my stew. Alright, pepper's in. I am going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of salt just to make sure that this layer is seasoned. Alright, we're going to get these guys softened. Usually takes about 7-8 minutes. And we're gonna come back and then we're gonna add our next layer. All right, so our carrots, onion, and celery are starting to soften now, so we're gonna go ahead and put in our mushrooms and our garlic. Just like that. We're gonna let this go for about 5 minutes to get a little color on those mushrooms. I am not gonna add any more salt right now because I don't want those mushrooms to lose their shape. So we're gonna give that 5 minutes and we're gonna come back and put in the next layer. All right, so our mushrooms and garlic have been cooking about 5 minutes, and we're starting to get this really nice fond or browning on the bottom of our pan, which is perfect. That's lots of flavor, so we want to kind of pull that flavor up and really help intensify it. So I'm just going to add a 1/4 cup of red wine to this. Now, if you don't want to use wine, you can skip this step. You could just use a little bit of stock too, and that would be fine. But really what that serves to do is to help us kind of pull all of that, whatever's stuck down on the bottom, all that delicious flavor and browning that we have. It's called deglazing the pan. And we just sort of let that reduce down. Again, it will really intensify the flavor of this too. It smells good. Alright, we're going to let that sink for a minute. It really doesn't take very long for it to reduce. And a good trick to know if it's completely reduced, if you just sort of pull the veggies back and it's dry on the bottom, which right now it's pretty dry, getting pretty dry down there, we're about good to go then. It only takes about a minute or two to do that. Alright, so next we're going to add our tomato paste. So remember the can trick, I took this lid off and I loosened the bottom lid, so now I can just push it through, and I got all of it out in one shot, which is great. We're going to stir our tomato paste into our veggies, and then we're going to let it cook for just a few minutes until it turns sort of a bright orange color. So we're just going to let this kind of think for a minute, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start adding some of those herbs and seasonings. We'll be right back. Alright, so we've let our tomato paste cook down a little bit, and when you pull it away from the bottom, you can see how it's turning that sort of bright orange color down on the bottom where it's nice and hot. So we are ready to go. So the next thing we're going to do is add some seasonings. We're going to add a tablespoon of my favorite, smoked paprika. Again, this is all a way of intensifying these flavors. We're also going to add a tablespoon of Italian seasoning. Just like that. I'm going to throw in my potatoes. I'm going to give that all a nice stir. Perfect. Then I'm going to put in my 5 cups of veggie stock. This is a time I would definitely use stock. Certainly too, if you aren't opposed to it being a non-vegetarian recipe, you could use other stock. You could use chicken stock. I'm keeping this a completely vegetarian recipe, so I am using veggie stock, but you can use whatever you have on hand. But that stock is really, again, going to intensify the flavor. So we're going to bring this up to a boil, and we'll be right back, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Okay, so my stew is boiling, so we're going to go ahead and add our rosemary now that I had chopped earlier. We're ready to go. Okay, give that a stir. Perfect. Alright, so we're going to put the lid on this. We're going to turn our heat down to low, and we're going to let this guy simmer for about 15-20 minutes And then we'll come back and we're gonna add a whole nother layer of flavor. So while my stew is over there simmering, I thought I'd get my other fresh ingredient, fresh herb ready to go. So this is some flat leaf or Italian parsley. We're gonna do a whole big bunch of it, about half a cup of it. So I'm just taking the tender part off the end and making myself a nice big pile so that I can get it chopped up. And when we stir this in at the end, it just adds a whole nother layer of sort of freshness. There's so many great herbs and seasonings in this stew. All right. That is a big old mess of parsley. These pieces aren't so good. I'd say this is always my saddest part of winter is when my parsley dies and it finally lets go. It says goodbye. Although the parsley in my garden in February is trying to grow. It's green, which is amazing. All right, there's my big pile. So I like to just try to consolidate my pile all together. Just sort of roll it all up. It's just gonna make it easier to chop. Just like that. And then I'm just gonna sort of run my knife through it. Can't even tell you how good my kitchen smells right now. My dogs are always very confused when I make vegetarian things because they're like, "It smells really good, Mom, but guess what? There's no meat in it." Okay, that looks good. It doesn't have to be too small. And that is ready to stir in just a little bit. So we'll come back when our stew is done simmering and see how it looks. All right, so it's been 15 minutes and I'm gonna take my lid off my stew. It has been simmering away. Oh, it smells so good. So the potatoes are starting to get nice and tender. So at this point, we're gonna go ahead and add in about 1.5 cups of peas. Now I know, peas are not everybody's favorites. Many people have childhood traumas related to being forced to eat peas. I get it. Still make the stew, omit the peas. You could certainly add a different bean. That is totally fine. But peas, if you like them, use them. If you don't, don't. I know they keep coming back in again, but I love peas. Anyway, we're gonna let this come up to a simmer again, and we're gonna put the lid back on and let this simmer for 5 minutes to kind of get those peas heated through and let them get all their flavor too. And then I'm gonna show you the final step. Welcome back. So I just took the stew off of the oven. I'm getting a little bit of a facial here right now. Sorry about that. But it smells incredible, looks delicious. The potatoes are all nice and tender. At this point too, you want to check your seasoning, make sure it has enough salt and pepper to your taste. You certainly could eat it like this. It's fine like this. It's not quite thickened like a stew that you would add a roux to kind of make that thicker sauce. So if you'd like to make the texture of a real stew, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can take a couple cups of it out, put it through a blender or food processor, and stir it back in. You can use a potato masher and sort of mash up some of those potatoes, and releasing some of that starch is what helps make it kind of stewier. Or I have an immersion blender. It's a very inexpensive one. I think it was $10. It's a cheap one, but it does the job. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through with my immersion blender a few passes. It's gonna get loud, I apologize. We want to leave a lot of the chunks so it's still a stew, But by doing this, and I hope you can see it now, it's really changed the texture of it, and now it looks like stew. So, my immersion blender out. Got some stuff stuck in there. Carrot, potato, peas. All right, perfect. Set that aside, and then I have my chopped parsley over here. This adds that really nice freshness to this now too. And we'll give that a stir. So we still have the nice chunks, but we have this lovely, like, thickened sauce. Oh, it's beautiful. Look at that. Wow, smells good. Well, I know what I'm having for dinner. Thank you for watching, and enjoy.